there, and welcome back. And today we'll be taking a look at the latest adaptation of Pinocchio, this time directed by Guillermo Del Toro and Mark Gustafson, which was released on Netflix on the 9th of December. And yeah, coming into this film, I wasn't really expecting all that much. I know it's a pretty big call to shrug off a Del Toro film, but it is what it is. I've been a bit down on animated films recently, and I just felt like we were in a bit of a slump from the major studios, and so I think I had a bit of bias against it coming into it. And on top of that, there's been so many different adaptations about Pinocchio recently. The Disney remake, which was arse. The weird Russian version, which was also arse. And then there was like a live action version from 2021, and I just wasn't feeling it. And I was worried that it was just going to be more of the same. And so I sat down to watch it, and my god, I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. This film is absolutely awesome in almost every conceivable way. And of course, now there's a massive call incoming that's completely clouded by recency bias. But I wouldn't be shocked at all if this was the winner of Best Animated Picture at the Oscars. It would be a very nice change of pace from the usual suspects, and honestly, it's not like there's that many serious contenders from this year anyway. It's been a bit of a lean year. And so I think it has a very good shot. But yeah, the Pinocchio film, it's very good. The story starts with the brief tale of Geppetto and his son Carlo, who lived during the Great War in a little Italian village. Geppetto was seen as the perfect Italian man, a good father, a devout Christian, a patriotic citizen, hard-working and kind. And the pair would spend their days working together carving toys and clocks and other things out of wood, whilst also making sure to plant trees to replace whatever they took. But these happy days come to an end when one day their village is bombed by enemy planes, blowing up the church in which they'd been working and killing Carlo. His death would send Geppetto into a very deep depression, and he'd spend decades lamenting his loss, becoming an alcoholic and rarely working at all. He became a shell of himself, with his reputation in the town in tatters. And so the film then cuts to decades later, sometime during World War II, during the age of fascist Italy. Geppetto is still deeply depressed, and one day, in a fit of drunken rage, he cuts down the tree he'd planted by Carlo's grave with the pine cone they'd found together, and uses the wood to fashion it into a little wooden boy, whom his drunken mind wishes to use to replace Carlo. After he falls down the stairs and passes out drunk, the wood sprite, a magical fairy of the forest, brings Pinocchio to life to try and give something for Geppetto to live for, and also entrusts Sebastian J. Cricket to be his guide and conscience, promising the cricket a wish if he does so. And this is done as recompense for bringing his house to life, as he'd previously made his home inside the tree before Geppetto cut it down and carved it into a boy. Anyway, at first, Geppetto and the town at large don't really react all that well to the existence of a wooden boy. But the local fascist official decides that he needs to learn obedience and thus he must attend school, which he immediately blows off to become a carnival attraction. And when his father figures it out, he goes to the carnival to get him back, only for Pinocchio to get hit by a car in the ruckus, sending him to the afterlife, where he meets Death, the sister of the wood sprite. Death reveals to him that he's immortal, and that every time he dies, he'll eventually just get sent back to the world of the living. And of course, after this he's restored to life, but now there's problems. The fascists want him to be a soldier, and his father owes the carnival millions of lira due to Pinocchio signing a contract to perform for them. After being yelled at and called a burden, Pinocchio runs away to the carnival to wipe away his father's debts, and asks for money to be sent to Geppetto to ensure that he's taken care of in his old age. Over the course of this part of the story, Pinocchio slowly befriends a monkey, another performer at the circus, and saves her from being beaten by Count Volpe, the owner. He then performs for Mussolini, but having grown disenfranchised by the carnival, mocks him openly, which gets him shot dead. And when he comes back to life, he's instantly drafted into the Italian army, as he's immortal, and is sent to train in a youth camp alongside Candlewick, the son of the local official that we mentioned earlier. Meanwhile, Sebastian and Geppetto are eaten by a giant dogfish trying to find him out on the sea. Back at the camp, Pinocchio teaches his new friend Candlewick to stand up to his father, only for the camp to be bombed, with everybody dying except for Pinocchio. He's then confronted by Volpe, who tries to kill him, only for his monkey friend to intervene and save him, taking them all over the cliff. Volpe dies on the rocks, and Pinocchio saves the monkey from drowning, only for the two of them to be eaten as well by the dogfish. Reunited at last, the four escape via the blowhole, and after a chase, they're able to kill the dogfish with a sea mine, which in turn kills Pinocchio, prompting Sebastian to use his wish to bring him back to life. The four then live a happy life together until eventually the mortals all grow old and die, leaving Pinocchio alone to discover his own place in the world before his eventual death, which is where the film ends. And yeah, this film's just awesome. Awesome in every conceivable way. And since we've started with the story, we'll just keep going that way. The story itself is really good, and it was nice to see that the adaptation was actually quite faithful to the original Adventures of Pinocchio source material. And I also like that they went in a more modern direction than the majority of films. Instead of having it be set in a picturesque, vaguely pre-industrial era, the story established itself first in rural Italy during the 1910s, and then jumps ahead to the late 30s, early 40s, infusing actual historical and cultural elements into the films, like the rise of fascism under Benito Mussolini. That already sets it apart from the rest of the Pinocchio adaptations. But what I really enjoyed the most was not shying away from the darker subject matter. The xenophobia that Pinocchio faces because he's made of wood, and he looks kind of creepy. Sending children to military youth camps in preparation for becoming true soldiers. Suppressing any form of dissent, like when Mussolini straight up kills Pinocchio for mocking him. Geppetto spiraling after the death of his son and becoming an alcoholic. None of this is strayed away from, and it lends a darker, more realistic tone to the film, which I think enhances everything, especially when it intertwines with the more light-hearted, wholesome, and comedic elements of the narrative, and the songs themselves. I also really enjoyed the characterization and personal arc of Pinocchio. It was nice to see them flip the script, so to speak. A lot of adaptations frame Pinocchio as the problem. He's disobedient, he's naughty, and thus he brings all his troubles on himself. But here it's framed differently. He isn't his own worst enemy. Being obedient isn't what makes a person a person. They're imperfect, and thus, even though he stays made of wood at the end, Pinocchio's still a real boy at the end of the story. Instead of going to Pleasure Island as a sort of narrative punishment for naughty children who do what they want to do, the film goes in the opposite direction. The children are sent to a fascist war camp to be trained as soldiers. It shows that forcing children into a box, demanding absolute obedience, is just as bad as having no rules, and letting them do whatever they want to do. And yeah, I found this to be a really nuanced and refreshing take on the story, and honestly a far more modern take on the story, which was nice. I think if anything, the only thing about the story I didn't like was a bit of the pacing. It felt like it did slow down and get a bit muddled after the halfway point, so the pacing could have done with a bit of work. Otherwise, it was narrative perfection for me. Also, somehow they managed to slip a gag about poo and farts into the film, and they made it ridiculously funny, as instead of just the classic farts, fart smell, poo, they frame it so it's all a massive insult directed towards Mussolini, who's sitting in the audience of the carnival. Also, it somehow doesn't feel out of place. And even then you don't feel like you're actually laughing at the poop joke itself, but the absurdity of this little boy having the absolute balls to say this sort of thing to a violent and tyrannical dictator. I found it to be quite a clever use of toilet humour. And then beyond the narrative, the acting was for the most part really good, especially the young kid they got to play Pinocchio. I mean, he just put on a really great performance, both when singing and speaking. And I mean, probably the only poor performance I felt was from Finn Wolfhard, and it was only because I feel like he was told to use a different accent. So to me, he sounded like he was doing a very bad attempt at an English accent, which was weird, because his dad's character, in the film itself, had an American accent, so I don't know what was going on there. Oh well. Visually speaking, the film is very striking. It's unique and beautiful and also kind of creepy looking, unsettling. And I think that ties back into the narrative themes. It's both beautiful, but with a darkness lurking underneath. Also, stop motion's always fun to see. And it's definitely something that I wish would make a bit of a retro comeback in the way that 2D traditional animation has been for the last couple of years. And then on top of that, the soundtrack. My god, the soundtrack is the most beautiful thing. So many wholesome and heart-wrenching songs, plus a few happy and upbeat ones too. I didn't actually realize coming into it was going to be a musical, so that was exciting. And then they just start spitting out banger after banger song. I mean, if they don't win Best Original Song, I'll be very surprised. Honestly, just give them all the awards. For me, it even feels like a film you could argue deserves to break out of the Best Animation box and actually get a Best Picture nomination. I mean, I doubt it would win, but I hope it gets a nomination at least. Because I really do think it deserves it. It's just great. And I think the world agrees. On Rotten Tomatoes, as of writing this, it has a 98% critical score and an 84% audience score, which is not bad at all in my opinion. I mean, it's still early, and we'll see how those change over time, but for now, it is looking real good. And so yeah, that's the end of the video. And I would like to say that these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the film? You like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.